Have you ever witnessed someone dig their own grave with their ego? Picture a bustling airport gate where an arrogant manager decides to humiliate a passenger just because of the color of his skin and his casual clothes. He thought he was putting a nobody in his place, asserting his tiny bit of authority to impress a crowd. What he didn't know was that the man standing quietly before him wasn't just a first-class ticket holder. He was the self-made multi-billionaire who had literally bought the entire airline 48 hours prior. Grab your popcorn, because this is a story of ultimate entitlement meeting the most satisfying, brutal karma you will ever hear. Eric Sterling was not a man who needed to announce his presence. At 42, he was the founding partner of Sterling Hayes Capital, a private equity firm known on Wall Street for taking failing, bloated corporations, trimming the toxic waste, and turning them into gold. He had built his fortune from the ground up, fighting through every systemic barrier placed in front of a young black man from the south side of Chicago. He didn't wear tailored Italian suits unless he had to. His daily uniform consisted of dark, well-fitted jeans, clean sneakers, and a plain gray hoodie. To the untrained eye, he looked like any other tired traveler. To those who knew luxury, they might have recognized the hoodie as a $2,500 Loro Piana cashmere piece, but to the average observer, he was just a guy. And that was exactly how Eric liked it. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon at JFK International Airport. Eric was scheduled to fly on Flight 808 down to Miami. The flight was operated by Atlantic Meridian Airlines, a legacy carrier that had been bleeding money for the last 5 consecutive quarters. Their stock was in the gutter, their customer satisfaction ratings were abysmal, and their public relations team was constantly putting out fires caused by poor management. What the public and the airline's own employees did not yet know was that at 11 p.m. on Sunday night, Eric's firm had finalized a stealthy, aggressive buyout, acquiring a 62% majority stake in Atlantic Meridian. The ink was barely dry on the multi-billion-dollar deal. Eric was flying to Miami to meet with the airline's reigning CEO, a man who was about to be forcefully retired, to sign the final transition documents. Eric could have easily taken his private Gulfstream G650, but part of his process when acquiring a distressed company was to experience the failure firsthand. He wanted to see exactly why Atlantic Meridian was losing its customers. He refused a VIP escort, bought a standard first-class ticket under his own name, and walked through the terminal like an ordinary civilian. Waiting for him at Gate 42 was Adrian Covington. Adrian was the Regional Director of Passenger Experience for the Northeast Hub. He was 55, wore a heavily starched shirt that fit a bit too tight around his middle, and possessed an ego that took up far more space than his actual authority warranted. Adrian was a relic of the old boys club of corporate aviation. He believed in strict hierarchies, aggressive management, and most importantly, curating the first-class experience to ensure it remained exclusive to what he considered the right kind of people. Adrian was currently terrorizing a young gate agent named Olivia Jenkins. Olivia had only been on the job for 6 months. She was a bright, empathetic 23-year-old drowning in student debt, terrified of stepping out of line and losing the health insurance she desperately needed for her mother's medical treatments. "You're not moving fast enough, Olivia," Adrian snapped, hovering over her shoulder as she frantically typed into the terminal computer. "And straighten your scarf. You look like a baggage handler. We have 5 Platinum Elite members on this flight. I expect you to greet them by name. I don't want any of the economy riffraff lingering near the priority lane. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Covington," Olivia whispered, her hands shaking slightly over the keyboard. Adrian adjusted his tie, his chest puffed out. He loved the gate. He loved the power of denying people, of deciding who was worthy of a complimentary upgrade and who was sent to the back of the plane. He thrived on the frantic, desperate energy of delayed passengers begging for his help, only to hit them with a smug, "There's nothing I can do, sir." As the boarding time approached, Eric Sterling grabbed a black coffee from a nearby kiosk and strolled toward Gate 42. He was tired. The negotiations had kept him awake for 3 straight days. He pulled the hood of his gray sweater up over his head to block out the harsh fluorescent terminal lights and stood quietly near the entrance of the priority boarding lane, waiting for the announcement. From behind the desk, Adrian's eyes darted over the waiting crowd. He spotted the executives in suits, the wealthy retirees with their designer luggage, and then his eyes locked onto Eric. A black man, wearing a hoodie, standing dead center in the first-class boarding area. Adrian's jaw tightened. Every internal bias, every ugly, preconceived notion he harbored flared up in an instant. In Adrian's mind, wealth had a specific look, a specific complexion, and a specific attitude. The man standing there did not fit his narrow, bigoted criteria. "Watch the desk," Adrian barked at Olivia. "I have to go handle a loiterer before we begin the boarding process. Now boarding our first-class passengers, Diamond Medallion members, and active-duty military." Olivia's voice echoed slightly over the PA system. Eric took a sip of his coffee, pulled his phone out of his pocket to pull up his digital boarding pass, and took a step forward into the stanchioned priority lane. Before he could take a second step, a hand shot out, physically blocking his path. "Excuse me." A sharp, condescending voice cut through the noise of the terminal. Eric stopped and looked up. Standing in front of him was Adrian Covington, a plastic smile plastered on his face that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "The main cabin boarding hasn't begun yet," Adrian said loudly, making sure his voice carried to the wealthy white passengers waiting behind Eric. "This lane is reserved for first class and our elite members. You need to step aside and wait for Group 5. Eric blinked, mildly surprised by the immediate hostility, but his voice remained incredibly calm. A deep, even baritone. "I'm aware. I'm flying first class." Adrian let out a short, patronizing laugh, shaking his head. "Right. Sir, I've been working at this airline for 20 years. I know what an upgrade scam looks like. People try to stand in this line every day, hoping we'll just wave them through to avoid a scene. It's not going to work. Please step aside before I have to make an issue out of this." Eric's eyes narrowed slightly. He had faced microaggressions his entire life, even after making his first billion. But the blatant disrespect from an employee of a company he now owned was jarring. This was exactly the disease he needed to cure within Atlantic Meridian. Instead of getting angry, Eric went completely analytical. "Let's see how deep the rot goes," he thought. "I'm not looking for an upgrade," Eric said simply. He held up his phone, the screen brightly displaying his QR code, his name Sterling. "Eric," and the bold letters "First Class, Seat 2A. Here is my boarding pass." Adrian aggressively snatched the phone out of Eric's hand. "Hey," Eric said, his voice dropping an octave, the first hint of steel showing through his calm demeanor. "Don't snatch my property." Adrian ignored him, squinting at the screen. He tapped it, trying to see if it was a screenshot or a manipulated image. Finding no immediate proof of forgery, he marched over to the boarding scanner, dragging Eric's phone with him. "Let's see what the system says," Adrian muttered. He slammed the phone onto the optical scanner. Beep, a bright green light flashed. The screen clearly displayed, "Approved, Seat 2A. Olivia, the young gate agent, leaned over. "Mr. Covington, the ticket is valid. He's fully checked in. We should let him board." "Shut up, Olivia," Adrian hissed under his breath. He glared at the screen. His ego was bruised. He had made a public spectacle of stopping Eric, and now the system was telling him he was wrong. But men like Adrian Covington do not apologize. They double down. Adrian turned back to Eric, holding the phone hostage. "I need to see a physical, government-issued ID." "You need to see my ID at the boarding gate?" Eric asked, raising an eyebrow. "TSA already verified my identity at security. Your policy only requires a boarding pass at the gate unless there is a specific security flag. I am the Regional Director of Passenger Experience." Adrian puffed up, stepping closer to Eric, trying to use his height to intimidate him. "And I am flagging you. You don't look like the person who purchased this ticket." A quiet gasp rippled through the small crowd of passengers who had gathered behind Eric. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit shifted uncomfortably. "Hey, come on, man," the passenger muttered. "Just let him on. We have places to be." "I am securing the aircraft, sir," Adrian called out to the crowd, acting as if he were a hero defending the gates of heaven. He turned his attention back to Eric, his voice dripping with venom. "A last-minute first-class ticket to Miami is nearly $4,000. Now, I don't know whose frequent flyer account you hacked into, or if you bought this ticket with a stolen credit card, but I am not letting you on my plane until you prove exactly who you are." Eric stood utterly still. The accusation of theft, the blatant racial profiling, the absolute arrogance, it was a masterclass in corporate liability. Adrian, isn't it? Eric asked softly, reading the gold name tag pinned to the man's chest. I want to be very clear with you. I bought this ticket with my own money. It is fully valid. If you deny me boarding right now, you are going to deeply regret it. To Adrian, this sounded like the empty threat of a broke scammer. Are you threatening me? You're threatening airline staff? I'm stating a fact, Eric replied smoothly. That's it, Adrian barked, slamming Eric's phone down onto the counter. He grabbed the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. Port Authority Police to Gate 42. I have a hostile, aggressive passenger attempting to use fraudulent ticketing to board a flight. I need him removed from the terminal immediately. Olivia looked horrified. Mr. Covington, please. He hasn't done anything wrong. You can't just call the police on him. I said, step away from the desk. Olivia, you're suspended for insubordination. Go to the break room. Adrian screamed, his face turning red. Olivia burst into tears, grabbing her purse, and ran down the jet bridge corridor, wanting to disappear. Eric watched her go, making a mental note of the young woman who had tried to defend him. Then, he looked back at Adrian, who was standing tall, looking incredibly proud of himself. The police are on their way, buddy, Adrian sneered, crossing his arms. You're not going to Miami today. You're going to a holding cell. Next time you try to play dress-up and sneak into the rich folks line, pick an airline that doesn't have me working the gate. Eric picked his phone off the counter, wiping a smudge off the screen. He didn't look angry. He looked deeply, profoundly disappointed. You know, Adrian, Eric said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the quiet, stunned terminal. I bought a ticket today to see if this company was worth saving. You just gave me my answer. Eric tapped a number on his phone and held it to his ear. The police were coming, but Eric had a phone call of his own to make. While Adrian Covington stood behind the gate counter, practically vibrating with the thrill of his own perceived authority, Eric Sterling pressed his cell phone to his ear. It rang twice before a polished, slightly nervous voice answered on the other end. Eric, my friend, said Arthur Pendleton, the outgoing CEO of Atlantic Meridian Airlines, speaking from his expansive corner office in Miami. I trust everything is smooth on your end? The transition team has the boardroom prepped for your arrival this afternoon. Eric kept his eyes locked on Adrian. The gate manager was currently loudly recounting Eric's crimes to an elderly couple, pointing a dramatic finger in Eric's direction. Arthur, there's been a slight change to the itinerary, Eric said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an approaching storm. It appears I won't be making flight 808. What? Why? Is there a mechanical delay? Arthur asked, the panic instantly bleeding into his tone. The ink on the multi-billion-dollar acquisition was still fresh. Arthur's golden parachute, his stock options, and his peaceful retirement completely depended on keeping Eric Sterling happy over the next 30 days of the transition period. No mechanical issues, Eric replied smoothly. Your regional director of passenger experience at Gate 42, a man named Adrian Covington, has unilaterally decided that my first-class ticket is fraudulent. He has suspended the gate agent who tried to help me, he has confiscated my boarding pass, and he has just called the Port Authority Police to have me arrested. There was dead silence on the line. For a second, Eric thought the call had dropped. Then, he heard the sound of Arthur Pendleton knocking over a glass of water on his mahogany desk. He did what? Arthur gasped, his voice cracking. Eric, please tell me this is a joke. Covington called the police on you? I'm looking at 2 officers walking down the concourse right now, Eric stated objectively. I just wanted to give you a courtesy call, Arthur. We will have to reschedule our signing. I have a feeling I'm going to be tied up dealing with your customer service department. Eric, listen to me. Do not move. Do not let them do anything. Arthur was practically hyperventilating. I am calling the JFK Operations Hub right this second. I am going to skin Covington alive. Just give me 3 minutes. Take your time, Arthur, Eric said, ending the call and sliding the phone back into his pocket. 2 Port Authority police officers, heavily armed and looking completely unamused by the disruption, strode up to the gate. Officer Miller, a burly veteran with gray at his temples, took point, while his younger partner stood back, scanning the crowd. Adrian Covington's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. He rushed out from behind the counter to meet them. Officers, thank goodness you're here, Adrian said, puffing out his chest. I am the regional director here. I caught this man attempting to use a fraudulent, likely stolen, first-class ticket to breach the priority boarding lane. When I confiscated the digital pass and demanded identification, he became extremely hostile and threatened me. Officer Miller looked at Adrian, then slowly turned his gaze to Eric. Eric was standing with his hands loosely clasped in front of him, entirely relaxed. The $2,500 Loro Piana cashmere hoodie framing a face of absolute, unbothered calm. He did not look like a hostile threat. He looked like a man watching a very poorly acted play. "Sir," Officer Miller said, approaching Eric with a neutral expression, "the airline manager is stating you're causing a disturbance and using a fake ticket. I'm going to need to see some government-issued identification." "Of course, officer," Eric replied politely. He reached slowly into his back pocket, pulling out a slim leather card holder. He handed Officer Miller his New York State driver's license. "And, to clear up the matter of the allegedly stolen ticket, here is the credit card used to purchase it." Eric handed over a solid black, heavy metal American Express Centurion card, the infamous black card, issued by invitation only to the ultra-wealthy. Officer Miller took the license and the heavy metal card. He looked at the ID, looked at Eric, and then glanced at the name on the black card. Eric Sterling. Miller handed the cards to his partner to run through dispatch and turned back to Adrian. "Mr. Covington, the ID appears perfectly valid. Did the system reject his boarding pass?" "That's irrelevant," Adrian sputtered, his face turning an ugly shade of magenta. He had expected the police to tackle Eric to the ground, not treat him with respect. Scammers have sophisticated ways of hacking our digital portals. I asked him to step aside, and he threatened my safety. I want him removed from the terminal. "What was the nature of the threat?" Officer Miller asked, narrowing his eyes. "I told him," Eric interjected, his voice carrying clearly, "that if he denied me boarding today, he would deeply regret it." "It was a statement of professional consequence, officer, not a physical threat. I have not raised my voice, nor have I taken a single aggressive step." The younger officer stepped up to Miller and whispered in his ear. "Sarge, dispatch just ran him. No warrants, no criminal record. Registered address is a $40 million penthouse in Tribeca. The card is real. This guy is a heavyweight." Officer Miller sighed, realizing exactly what was happening. He had been working at JFK for 15 years. He knew racial profiling when he saw it. He turned to Ed's demeanor shifting from neutral to stern. "Mr. Covington, the passenger's identification is valid. He is who he says he is. Unless you have actual proof that the ticket was purchased fraudulently, no crime has been committed here. We are not arresting this man." Adrian Covington felt the eyes of 30 first-class passengers burning into his back. The whispers had started. People were pulling out their phones, realizing the manager was completely in the wrong. But Adrian was a man who had spent 2 decades building his tiny fiefdom at Gate 42. Admitting he was wrong to a black man in a hoodie in front of his elite passengers was a humiliation he simply could not swallow. "Fine," Adrian snapped, his voice trembling with furious indignation. "If you won't do your jobs, I will do mine. As the Regional Director of Passenger Experience, I have the final say on the safety and security of this aircraft." Adrian marched back behind the gate counter and slammed his hand down on the keyboard. Under federal aviation regulations, airline personnel have the right to refuse service to any passenger they deem disruptive or a risk to flight operations. Adrian announced loudly, ensuring everyone in the terminal could hear him play his trump card. "You are disruptive, Mr. Sterling. You have caused a scene, delayed my boarding process, and made my staff feel unsafe. I am officially denying you boarding. Your ticket is canceled, and you are permanently banned from flying Atlantic Meridian Airlines." The terminal went dead silent. A few passengers gasped at the sheer audacity. Even Officer Miller looked disgusted. "You're making a massive mistake, buddy," the officer muttered to Adrian. "My gate, my rules." Adrian sneered, feeling the rush of power return to his veins. He looked at Eric, waiting for the inevitable explosion. He waited for the anger, the shouting, the begging. Instead, Eric simply smiled. It was a cold, sharp, terrifyingly calm smile. "Cancelled," Eric repeated softly. "And banned." "That's right," Adrian said, standing tall. "Now, collect your things and leave this terminal before I have you trespassed." "I'll leave," Eric said, taking a step closer to the desk, his eyes locking onto Adrian's with an intensity that suddenly made the manager's stomach drop. "But I need you to do your job properly, Adrian. If you are canceling my flight and banning me from the airline, I require a physical, printed receipt of the cancellation. And I want you to sign it personally, citing disruptive behavior as the cause." Adrian hesitated for a fraction of a second, unsettled by Eric's utter lack of panic. But his ego pushed him forward. Gladly. The dot matrix printer behind the desk whirred to life. Adrian snatched the paper, grabbed a pen, and signed his name with aggressive, jagged strokes. He shoved the paper across the counter. "There. Now get out," Adrian demanded. Eric took the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Adrian. You've been incredibly helpful." Instead of walking toward the exit, Eric simply turned around, walked over to a cluster of empty seats near the massive terminal windows, and sat down. He crossed his legs, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling. "I told you to leave," Adrian shouted. Officer Miller stepped in front of the gate manager. "Mr. Covington, he has a right to be in the public terminal. He's no longer trying to board your plane. We're done here. Let your passengers board." The officers turned and walked away, shaking their heads at the sheer stupidity of corporate middle management. Fuming, but victorious in his own mind, Adrian grabbed the PA microphone. "We apologize for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. We will now resume priority boarding for Flight 808, 3 terminals away, in the exclusive Atlantic Meridian VIP Executive Lounge." Gregory Lawson was having the worst morning of his life. Gregory was the vice president of Northeast Operations. He was Adrian Covington's ultimate boss. 30 seconds ago, he had been enjoying a mimosa and a quiet morning reviewing quarterly reports. Then his private cell phone had rung. The caller ID read, "Arthur Pendleton, CEO." Gregory had answered the phone with a cheerful greeting, only to have his eardrums shattered by the reigning CEO screaming with a level of pure terror Gregory had never heard before. "Lawson, if Eric Sterling is not sitting in first class on flight 808 inches the next 5 minutes, you are fired, your pension is gone, and I will personally ensure you never work in aviation again. Get to gate 42. Now." Gregory hadn't even asked questions. The name Eric Sterling had sent a bucket of ice water down his spine. Executive leadership had been briefed in absolute secrecy just yesterday. Sterling Hayes Capital had bought the airline. Eric Sterling was essentially God. Gregory had dropped his phone, abandoned his briefcase, and sprinted out of the lounge. He was a 50-year-old man who hadn't done cardio in a decade, but he ran through Terminal 4 like an Olympic sprinter. He dodged luggage carts, shoved past bewildered tourists, and completely ignored the burning in his lungs. Sweat poured down his face, completely soaking the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. "Please," Gregory prayed as he rounded the corner toward Concourse C. "Please let Arthur be exaggerating. Please tell me Covington didn't do something stupid." Back at gate 42, Adrian was swiping the last of the first-class boarding passes. He felt fantastic. He had protected his gate. He had asserted his dominance. He looked over at Eric, who was still sitting calmly in the waiting area, and offered a smug, victorious smirk. "Have a nice day, Mr. Sterling," Adrian mocked loudly as he prepared to close the jet bridge doors. "Adrian, stop!" The scream echoed down the long corridor of the terminal. Adrian froze, his hand hovering over the door control. He turned to see a man in a soaking wet suit, tie flying over his shoulder, sprinting frantically toward the gate. It took Adrian a moment to recognize the red, hyperventilating face of the vice president of operations. Gregory Lawson hit the gate counter so hard it shook, gasping for air, clutching his chest. He looked frantically around the boarding area, his panicked eyes scanning the remaining crowd. "Mr. Lawson?" Adrian asked, completely bewildered. "Sir, what are you doing here? Is there a ground stop?" Gregory ignored him. His eyes locked onto the man sitting quietly in the gray Loro Piana hoodie near the window. "Oh my God," Gregory whispered, all the blood draining from his face. Gregory Lawson, the vice president of Northeast Operations for Atlantic Meridian Airlines, leaned heavily against the Gate 42 podium, gasping for air. His custom Italian silk tie was skewed, his chest heaved violently, and beads of cold sweat dripped from his forehead onto the polished countertop. For a man who spent his days in temperature-controlled boardrooms looking at spreadsheets, sprinting half a mile through JFK, Terminal 4 was a near-death experience. But the physical pain in his chest was absolutely nothing compared to the sheer, unadulterated terror freezing his veins as his eyes locked onto the man sitting calmly in the waiting area. Adrian Covington, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality crashing down around him, stepped forward. He puffed out his chest, misinterpreting his superior's panic as a response to some broader airport emergency. "Mr. Lawson, sir," Adrian said, projecting his best authoritative management voice. "Are we under a ground stop? Is there a security breach in the terminal? Don't worry, I have Gate 42 completely locked down. I even just handled a major disruption." That man over there, Adrian pointed a stiff finger directly at Eric Sterling, was attempting to use fraudulent credentials to access priority boarding. He became hostile, so I permanently banned him and canceled his ticket to protect the aircraft. Gregory slowly turned his head to look at Adrian. The vice president's face, previously flushed bright red from the run, drained to a sickly, translucent gray. He looked at Adrian not as an employee, but as a man who had just pulled the pin on a live grenade and casually tossed it into the company's vault. "You," Gregory wheezed, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "You did what?" "I canceled his ticket, sir," Adrian repeated, his smug smile faltering slightly as he finally registered the absolute horror in Gregory's eyes. "Standard operating procedure for a disruptive, non-compliant passenger. The Port Authority police were just here. I handled it." "You idiot," Gregory breathed out. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Then, Gregory found his breath, and his voice erupted into a concussive roar that silenced the entire boarding area. "You absolute, incompetent, arrogant fool. Shut your mouth. Do not say another word." Adrian physically recoiled, staggering back a step as if he had been slapped across the face. The remaining first-class passengers, who were halfway down the jet bridge, actually stopped and turned around. Ignoring Adrian completely, Gregory practically crawled out from behind the counter. He straightened his ruined tie with shaking hands and walked toward the waiting area. He approached the man in the gray Loro Piana hoodie with the slow, terrifying deference of a man approaching an executioner. "Mr. Sterling," Gregory said, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the syllables. He stopped a respectful distance away and instinctively bowed his head. "Mr. Sterling, my name is Gregory Lawson. I am the Vice President of Operations for this hub. I received a call from Arthur Pendleton. Sir, I cannot even begin to express my profound apologies for what has just transpired here." Eric Sterling did not stand up. He did not yell. He simply looked up from his phone, his expression a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. "Mr. Lawson," Eric replied, his deep voice carrying effortlessly in the suddenly silent terminal. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Although, the circumstances could certainly be better. Arthur told me you were an efficient man. It took you exactly 4 minutes to run here from the executive lounge. Impressive." "Sir, please," Gregory begged, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Let me escort you onto the aircraft right now. I will have the captain personally come out and apologize. I will bump whoever is sitting next to you so you have the entire row. We are holding the flight for you." From behind the counter, Adrian Covington felt the floor drop out from beneath him. His brain simply could not process what he was witnessing. Why was the Vice President of Operations begging a casually dressed, disruptive scammer to board the plane? Why was he bowing to him? "Mr. Lawson," Adrian interjected, unable to control his bruised ego. "Sir, with all due respect, you cannot override my safety call. I am the regional director of this gate. That man is a security threat. You are violating federal aviation protocols by putting him on that plane." Gregory whipped around, his eyes blazing with a fury that could melt steel. "Adrian, if you speak one more time, I swear to God I will have terminal security drag you out of this airport by your hair. You have no idea what you have just done." Gregory turned back to Eric, clasping his hands together in a pleading gesture. "Mr. Sterling, please. Let us get you on your way to Miami." Eric slowly stood up. He smoothed out the front of his hoodie, picked up his small leather duffel bag, and looked Gregory dead in the eye. "I appreciate the hustle, Gregory," Eric said calmly, "but there is a slight logistical problem with your offer." Eric reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of dot matrix printer paper. He unfolded it and held it up. Your regional director of passenger experience just utilized his authority under federal aviation regulations to officially deem me a threat to flight operations, Eric stated, his voice ringing with cold, legal precision. He has permanently banned me from flying Atlantic Meridian Airlines, and he has signed this official corporate document citing me for disruptive behavior. As a man who respects the law and corporate compliance, I cannot possibly board that aircraft. It would be a violation of your own company policy. Gregory stared at the signed piece of paper. He felt physically sick. Arthur Pendleton's screaming voice echoed in his head. If Eric Sterling is not on that plane, you are fired. Your pension is gone. Mr. Sterling, that piece of paper is void, Gregory stammered, his panic reaching a fever pitch. It's meaningless. Covington had no grounds. Please, tear it up. Oh, I'm not tearing this up, Gregory, Eric said softly, a dangerous smile touching the corners of his mouth. This piece of paper is a multi-million-dollar liability. This piece of paper is documented proof of racial profiling, egregious policy violation, and gross mismanagement at the gate level of this airline. And the man who signed it is still standing behind your counter, wearing your company's uniform. Eric shifted his gaze from the trembling vice president and locked eyes with Adrian Covington. I think it's time we cleared up the confusion, Adrian, Eric said, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with the absolute authority of a man who held the fate of thousands of employees in his hands. Eric Sterling walked slowly toward the gate counter. Gregory Lawson flanked him, looking like a Secret Service agent escorting the president. The crowd of passengers at the gate, sensing a monumental shift in the universe, pulled out their phones to record. Adrian stood frozen behind the podium. His chest was tight. His smugness had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The man he had racially profiled, the man he had tried to have arrested, was now standing directly in front of him, radiating an aura of total, crushing power. You wanted to know who I was, Adrian, Eric began, his tone conversational but laced with lethal intent. You demanded to know how a man like me could afford a $4,000 first-class ticket. You assumed I hacked a system. You assumed I stole a credit card. You assumed everything about my character, my financial status, and my right to exist in your exclusive space based entirely on your own pathetic prejudices. Adrian opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words died in his throat. My name is Eric Sterling, he continued, placing his hands flat on the counter and leaning in close. I am the founder and managing partner of Sterling Hayes Capital. At 11 o'clock on Sunday night, my firm executed a $4.2 billion leveraged buyout of Atlantic Meridian Airlines. We acquired a 62% majority voting stake. I didn't just buy a ticket on this plane, Adrian. I bought the plane. I bought the gate. I bought the terminal lease. Eric paused, letting the silence stretch out, letting the sheer magnitude of the truth crush the air out of Adrian's lungs. And as of 48 hours ago, Eric whispered, his voice slicing through the quiet terminal, I pay your salary. The collective gasp from the passengers was audible. A woman in the front row covered her mouth in shock. Adrian Covington's face went entirely slack. His eyes widened to the size of saucers, darting frantically between Eric's calm face and Gregory Lawson's furious, confirming glare. His knees actually buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the edges of the podium to stay upright. No, Adrian stammered, his voice weak, high-pitched, and broken. That's impossible. You're just a what, Adrian? Eric challenged, his eyes turning to ice. Finish the sentence. Adrian couldn't. He was suffocating on his own bias. He had just publicly humiliated, harassed, and banned the supreme owner of his entire company. Mr. Sterling, Gregory intervened, stepping forward, desperate to save his own skin. I assure you, this does not reflect the values of Atlantic Meridian. Covington will be dealt with immediately. He will be suspended pending a full HR investigation. Suspended? Eric turned to the VP, raising an eyebrow. Gregory, I am currently flying down to Miami to restructure this failing company. I specialize in cutting out dead weight. We are not doing an HR investigation for an open and shut liability. Eric turned his attention back to the shaking gate manager. Adrian Covington, Eric said loudly, addressing him with absolute finality. You are not suspended. You are terminated, effective immediately, for cause. You have egregiously violated corporate anti-discrimination policies. You have harassed a customer and you falsely weaponized law enforcement. Because you are being fired for documented, undeniable cause, your severance package is void. Your stock options, unvested, are dissolved. You are entitled to your final paycheck for hours worked and absolutely nothing else. Tears welled up in Adrian's eyes. His 20-year career, his pension, his inflated ego, his entire identity annihilated in 60 seconds. "Please," Adrian begged, his voice cracking, the arrogance completely stripped away. "Mr. Sterling, I made a mistake. I was just trying to protect the airline. I have a mortgage. I have kids in college. You can't do this to me over one misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Eric replied coldly, completely unmoved by the man's sudden tears. "It was a choice you made repeatedly over the last 20 minutes, even when your own system, the police, and your junior agent told you that you were wrong. You dug this grave, Adrian. Now you get to lie in it. Give Mr. Lawson your security badge and step away from my counter." Trembling violently, Adrian unclipped his airport SITA badge and handed it to Gregory. He looked like a deflated balloon, a hollow shell of the tyrant he had been just moments prior. He grabbed his briefcase and began the long, agonizing walk of shame down the concourse, avoiding the glaring eyes and camera lenses of the passengers he had tried so hard to impress. Eric watched him go, feeling no satisfaction, only the grim validation that this airline desperately needed his intervention. He then turned to Gregory Lawson. "Where is Olivia Jenkins?" Gregory blinked, momentarily confused by the sudden shift. "Who?" "The young gate agent who was working this desk 10 minutes ago," Eric said sharply. "The one Adrian suspended for trying to do the right thing and process my valid ticket. Find her." Gregory scrambled for his radio, barking orders to the Terminal Operations Center. Less than 2 minutes later, Olivia Jenkins emerged from the employee break room corridor. Her eyes were red from crying, her uniform slightly rumpled. She looked terrified, expecting to be fired by the VP of Operations. She walked up to the counter, keeping her head down. "Mr. Lawson, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell Mr. Covington the ticket was—" "Olivia," Eric interrupted gently, his voice instantly softening from the corporate executioner back to the calm, observant man he had been at the start. Olivia looked up, her eyes widening as she recognized Eric standing next to the vice president. "You're the passenger," she said quietly. "I am." Eric smiled. "And I want to apologize to you for the position my management team put you in today. You did your job perfectly. You read the system, you trusted the data, and you tried to de-escalate a volatile manager. You showed exactly the kind of integrity this airline has been missing." Olivia looked completely bewildered. Gregory leaned in. "Olivia, this is Eric Sterling. He is the new majority owner of Atlantic Meridian Airlines." Olivia's jaw dropped. She looked at Eric, speechless. "I don't believe in punishing good people for the sins of their cowardly bosses," Eric said. "Effective today, Olivia, you are no longer a junior gate agent. You are officially promoted to Regional Director of Passenger Experience for Gate 42. You're taking Adrian's job, and you're getting his salary. Gregory here is going to fast-track your paperwork by the end of the day. Isn't that right, Gregory?" "Absolutely, Mr. Sterling." Gregory nodded vigorously, sweating profusely. "Consider it done. Immediately." Olivia covered her mouth, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but this time, they were tears of absolute, overwhelming relief. The crushing weight of her student loans and her mother's medical bills suddenly felt a little lighter. "Thank you," she sobbed quietly. "Mr. Sterling, thank you so much." "Don't thank me, Olivia. You earned it," Eric said, picking up his duffel bag. He looked at Gregory one last time. "Clean up this terminal, Gregory. I'll see you at the quarterly review, assuming you survive the transition." Without another word, Eric Sterling turned and walked down the jet bridge to board his flight, leaving behind a fundamentally changed airline and a legendary story of karma that would echo through the halls of JFK for decades. When Eric Sterling stepped onto Flight 808, the atmosphere inside the cabin was electric, charged with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. Word in the airline industry travels faster than a Boeing 787 at cruising altitude. By the time Eric reached the door of the aircraft, the lead flight attendant, a seasoned professional named Chloe Miller, was standing at attention. She didn't just offer the standard welcome aboard greeting. She stood with her hands clasped, her posture perfect, and a look of deep respect on her face. "Mr. Sterling," Chloe said, her voice steady but her eyes wide. "It is an absolute honor to have you on our flight. We've been briefed on the situation at the gate. Please, follow me." Eric offered her a small, tired smile. "Just a coffee, Chloe. Black. No fuss." As he settled into seat 2A, the very seat Adrian Covington had claimed he didn't belong in, Eric looked out the window at the JFK tarmac. He saw the baggage handlers, the fuel crews, and the tug drivers. These were the people who kept the world moving. Yet they were often overseen by men like Adrian, men who valued the shine of a shoe over the soul of a human being. The flight to Miami was the quietest 3 hours of Eric's life. The cabin crew treated him with a level of care that wasn't just first-class service. It was the service of people who finally felt they had a leader worth following. 2 hours later, a black Cadillac Escalade was waiting at the private terminal of Miami International. Eric was whisked away to the Atlantic Meridian headquarters in Coral Gables, a towering glass monolith that overlooked the turquoise waters of the Atlantic. In the 40th floor boardroom, the old guard was waiting. Arthur Pendleton sat at the head of the table, flanked by the CFO, Thomas Whitby, and the head of legal, Eleanor Vance. Wait, no. Let's call her Eleanor Rigby. No. Let's go with Eleanor Hurst. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and anxiety. When Eric walked in, still wearing his gray hoodie and jeans, the contrast was jarring. The board members were in three-piece Brioni suits, looking like relics of a bygone era of corporate opulence. "Eric," Arthur said, standing up with a shaky smile. "We heard about the incident. Gregory Lawson informed us that the manager was terminated. We are already drafting a public statement to distance ourselves from his actions." Eric didn't sit down. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city. "That manager, Adrian, is a symptom, Arthur. He isn't the disease. The disease is the culture you built. A culture where a man in a suit is a guest and a man in a hoodie is a threat. A culture where the people on the front lines are taught to be gatekeepers instead of hosts." Eric turned around, his eyes locking onto Thomas Whitby, the CFO. "Thomas, I saw the quarterly projections. You've slashed training budgets by 15% every year for the last 3 years. You've prioritized exclusive amenities while letting the basic human element of this airline rot. You thought you were saving money. Instead, you were burning brand equity." "Now, Eric, let's be reasonable," Whitby stammered. "We have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders." "I am the shareholder now, Thomas," Eric interrupted, his voice like a gavel. "I own 62% of this company, and my first act as chairman is to introduce the Sterling Protocol." Eric tossed a thin folder onto the mahogany table. "Starting Monday," Eric announced, "every executive in this room, including you, Arthur, will spend 1 week every quarter working the front lines. You will check bags. You will scan boarding passes. You will handle the economy riffraff, as Adrian called them. If you cannot look a passenger in the eye and treat them with dignity regardless of the color of their skin or the price of their shoes, you have no business leading this company." The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. "And as for Adrian Covington," Eric continued, "I want a full audit of his 20-year tenure. I want to know every passenger he unfairly banned and every employee he bullied. We will be reaching out to every single one of them with a personal apology and a lifetime travel voucher. We aren't just fixing a PR problem, we are fixing a soul." The real-life hit back for Adrian Covington didn't end with his walk of shame at JFK. In the age of the smartphone, his humiliation was permanent. The video of him being confronted by the billionaire in the hoodie went viral on TikTok and LinkedIn, racking up over 50 million views in 48 hours. Adrian tried to apply for management positions at Delta, United, and even smaller regional carriers like JetBlue. But the moment his name appeared in a Google search, the doors slammed shut. He was unhireable, a textbook example of corporate liability and toxic leadership. He eventually had to sell his home in the Hamptons. He moved to a small apartment in New Jersey, working as a night shift security guard for a warehouse, a job where he had to wear a uniform and take orders from people he once would have looked down upon. Every night, as he sat in his small booth, he had to live with the knowledge that his own pride had cost him everything. Meanwhile, back at Gate 42, Olivia Jenkins was thriving. Under her leadership, the gate became the highest-rated service point in the entire Atlantic Meridian network. She implemented a human-first policy, ensuring that every passenger was treated like a guest in a home, not a number in a system. A year later, Eric Sterling returned to JFK. This time, he wasn't there for a buyout. He was just traveling to see his mother in Chicago. He walked up to Gate 42, still wearing his favorite gray hoodie. Olivia saw him from a mile away. She didn't bow. She didn't panic. She walked out from behind the counter and gave him a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling," she said. "Your seat in first class is ready. But honestly, I think you'd enjoy the vibe in the main cabin today. We've got a great group on board." Eric laughed, a sound of genuine joy. "You know what, Olivia? Put me in the back. I want to see how the new Atlantic Meridian feels from the middle seat." As Eric walked down the jet bridge, he knew he had done more than just save a failing airline. He had proven that in a world of hierarchies and ego, the most powerful thing you can be is kind. This story isn't just about a billionaire and a bigoted manager. It's a reminder that the way we treat people when we think they have nothing to offer us is the truest reflection of our character. Adrian Covington thought he was protecting his exclusive world, but in reality, he was just building a prison for his own career. Eric Sterling didn't use his power to bully. He used it to balance the scales and give a chance to someone like Olivia, who truly deserved it. Karma has a funny way of finding you, whether you're in a penthouse or at a boarding gate.